Now, David, if you would like to make the introductions, we can get started, and I'll continue to let people in as they wake up.
I'll be delighted. Ben, thank you for
Thank
coming
you.
this morning. We really appreciate your coming. I'm going to read a short bio. Dr. Benjamin Dworkin serves as the founding director of the Rowan Institute for Public Policy and Citizenship at Rowan University in Glassboro, New Jersey. He began at this position in January 2018 with a focus on informing, engaging, and training Rowan students, faculty, and the public. Dworkin is responsible for positioning the Institute at the nexus of applied politics and the issues of the day, further building on Rowan's reputation at a leading research institution of higher education in New Jersey. Under Dworkin's leadership, the Institute offers programs and guest speakers focusing on both the practice of politics and citizen participation, supports students through academic and career development, internship placement, and scholarships, and connects faculty and the students from across the university with public entities to facilitate public policy research. Additionally, Dworkin teaches courses at the Rowan University Department of Political Science. As one of New Jersey's most astute and widely quoted political analysts, he serves as a nonpartisan commentator on political developments for media in New Jersey and nationally. He has appeared on numerous network and cable news shows and is frequently quoted by all of New Jersey's major newspapers and radio stations, as well as the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, USA Today, the Chicago Tribune, and the Los Angeles Times. In 2020 and 21, Dr. Dworkin was named one of the top influencers in higher education in New Jersey. Previously, he was named one of the 100 most powerful unelected people in New Jersey politics, which was in 2016. Prior to launching the Institute at Rowan, Dr. Dworkin spent 10 years as the director of the Rebovich Institute for New Jersey Politics at Rider University. Dr. Dworkin earned his MA and PhD in political science at Rutgers University. His undergraduate degree is from Princeton University. He lives with his wife and 3 daughters in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. Welcome, Benjamin Dworkin.
Thank you, David, for that very generous introduction, exactly as I wrote it for you. I only wish my mom were here to believe some of that stuff. So thank you all for coming. Chag Sameach, happy Sukkot to everybody. Appreciate you being here this morning. Let me just jump right in and start with this. A politician, a scientist, and a rabbi are all sitting together fishing. They're in a boat. And they're arguing about whose profession is the oldest, who's been around the longest. Gentlemen, says the rabbi, surely religion came first. The earth was created in 6 days by Hashem himself. Oh, come now, says the scientist, the great defender of rationality. The world was created by the Big Bang. Science is the world's oldest profession. Why, before us, there was only chaos. Ah, says the politician, and who do you think created the chaos? That is what, thank you for the laugh, that was unmuted, appreciate that. That's what politics in 2021 often seems like, the study of chaos. And so my job is today is to really try and unravel some of it. And what I'd like to do with you in my time with you this morning is to speak a little bit about 3 things. First, how the changes in American society have affected our political party system. Second, how the Democratic Party and the Republican Party have each been facing new and dramatic tensions in recent years. And finally, how these changes in each party present very real challenges to the American Jewish community and what we need to do to combat them. At the end, of course, I'm happy to take questions. One of the great ironies of American politics is that the founding fathers didn't care for political parties. They saw no use for them. For our nation's original leaders, political parties were, in the words of one historian, nothing other than divisive, distracting, and dangerous. So our modern understanding of oppositional parties that are free to express themselves, free to agitate among the electorate, free to form ongoing organizational structures, it didn't exist back in the 1700s. It had to develop over time. And so, starting with the election of 1800, America engaged in something that had never been seen before in history: the peaceful transition of power from one party to the other. We handed off control of government through the ballot, not the bullet. No one had ever seen that before. And over time, American politics matured. Political parties, something we thought we'd never need or want, gradually came to be seen as both a necessity and desired. And yet today, increasing numbers of Americans can't stand political parties. We seem to have a supply side problem in our politics. What the parties are offering the American people is so often unsatisfying and leave many of us hungry for something else. Now, I'd like to suggest that there are two societal reasons for this. The first has to do with speed, and the second has to do with choice. Among the reasons for this frustration and anger with political parties is that over the last 30 years or so, our world, when we think about it, our world has started to move much, much faster. It's all about instant messaging now. Overnight, no, not even overnight, 1 hour delivery, 24/7 news. You can't wait till 6 o'clock to get the news anymore. It's gotta be instant, it's gotta go faster. Indeed, watching 24-hour news network isn't fast enough. So now we have that ticker that runs along the bottom of your screen to tell you even more instant news than the news person who's speaking to you on the main part of the screen. Everything is going faster and faster, and yet our political parties plod along. So with seemingly endless campaigns whose end only marks the beginning of the next long campaign. Americans' frustration and anger with political parties is not just based on the incongruence between the speed of our world and the slowness of party action. It's also about choice. One byproduct of the internet age is the huge number of choices we now have at our fingertips. Whether it's the 500 channel universe on television or the ability to shop at Amazon and find virtually anything, we have all grown accustomed to having choices, and not just an array of options, personalized options driven by algorithms that continually refine the items that get to the top of our screen. If you like this book, you may be interested in these books. It's all about personalized choice. We are spoiled with so many choices, micro-targeted to our individual tastes. And in this kind of world, we still have just two major parties. And so it makes sense when everything else seems to go fast, but parties go slow. And when we have a gazillion choices for anything we want, but only two major parties, it makes sense that people would get angry and frustrated. But the dynamics of a two-party system is that there isn't any real opportunity for factions within each party, tribes within each party, to break off and form their own parties, like you would see in Israel, for example, where it happens all the time. Our two parties are giant tents encompassing millions of Americans and often divergent views, but still keeping those voices just under the two tents. And so when I speak to you today about the Democrats or the Republicans, we should all recognize that I am talking about very diverse groups of people trying to work together, often unsuccessfully, under a very loose framework. But here's the key point I'd like to express today. Both the Democratic Party and the Republican Party are feeling the tensions of having so many people under their respective tents. And recently, those tensions have started to affect the American Jewish community, and they are therefore worthy of some consideration this morning. So to really dig into what's happening today with the parties and the Jewish community, We need to begin by examining the changes that are happening within each party, because they're different. Let's start with the Democrats. The factions of today's Democratic Party are arrayed along a pretty traditional ideological line, from strongly liberal to somewhat liberal to moderate. Now, there are two things that are really interesting about this lineup of the Democratic factions. First, their relative size and influence has been changing in really the last half dozen years. Here's what I mean. American politics goes through different eras, and these eras shape how we talk and think about politics. For those in my generation, and I'm in my 50s, our political consciousness was raised and was shaped by the Reagan era, which effectively began with his inauguration in 1981. Thereafter, for years, the politics of the era, the American political world we lived in, was defined by Ronald Reagan's priorities. Government is bad, taxes should be low, defense spending should be high, corporations are good, and the suburbs, not the cities, are the future. This is not to say that Republicans won every election in the Reagan era. They clearly didn't. But what I am saying is that the political landscape upon which these partisan battles were fought was shaped by Reagan's agenda, by Reagan's vision, even after he was long gone from office. So Democrats get elected, like Bill Clinton, they win the presidency, but even Clinton famously said the era of big government is over, because he's operating within the context of the Reagan era. For many of us, the Reagan era defined how we saw the world, the role of government in business, how we understood politics. Alas, here's the thing about political eras, and there's really no way to get around this. By definition, they end. They simply do not go on forever. It was an era. And so after about 35 years, starting in 2015 or so, we began to see a change in America. Consider these developments. The national strength and staying power of Bernie Sanders, an avowed democratic socialist. The demand for a $15 minimum wage, the push to legalize marijuana, the drive to re-regulate Wall Street. What do they all have in common? They all reflect the emergence of a new progressive era in American politics, a new era that has begun replacing the Reagan era as the frame, the prism through which we see the world. Just 15 years ago, in 2006, each of these issues that I just mentioned would have been on page 40 of the Times or the Washington Post, if they were covered at all. The $15 minimum wage in 2000, we wouldn't be talking about that. That would be some far left loony idea. But today, those issues get on the front page, above the fold. And so what we see in today's Democratic Party are the effects of this changing political era. You have the moderate faction of the party, dominant over the last 30 years or so, but shrinking somewhat today. The second largest segment of the Democratic Party are those who identify as somewhat liberal. And finally, there are those who describe themselves as strongly liberal, the smallest of the three segments, but also one that is growing, and definitely the loudest. It is the strongly liberal faction who currently hold the most passion, the most energy in the party, and a growing number of key positions in the party hierarchy. So after decades of Reagan-era Democrats, things have changed. That era is over, and the strongly liberal Democrats, from their perspective, this is their time. Their voices, which had been isolated, largely silenced in the Democratic Party of the Reagan era, are now more forceful than any other time we've seen since the early 1970s. They can no longer be ignored. And yet, none of their most favored candidates won the presidential nomination. Now, a big reason that these candidates, backed by the strongly liberal faction of today's party, didn't win the presidential nomination in 2020 was because of the second really interesting thing about the Democratic Party's current makeup. The strongly liberal Democrats and even the somewhat liberal Democrats are overwhelmingly white people. But the party itself, overall, the Democratic Party itself, is just a little more than half white, about 51%. The liberal and strongly liberal Democratic factions are 2/3 white. So when you think about that logically, the moderate wing of the Democratic Party, which we often think of as bubbas, we think of as working class men from the South and the Midwest, it's actually much more diverse, because that's where a large bulk of the diversity in the Democratic Party resides ideologically. The moderate Democratic faction is largely people of color, Blacks, Hispanics, Asian Americans. These are the people who made Joe Biden the nominee. Some 70-something white moderate candidate that no one gave a chance to in the beginning of this race. Well, if anything, the Democratic Party is not going to nominate a white old guy. It's exactly what who the party nominated. Why? Because he had the support of people of color, because their moderate politics reflected his politics. So in sum, the Democratic Party's divisions are highlighted by three groups: a large but slightly shrinking moderate faction, those who are somewhat liberal, and those who identify as strongly liberal, who are the loudest and growing, even if they are the smallest segment overall of the three. And this strongly liberal faction, as influential as they've been within the party in recent memory. But they are limited, not just because of their size, but because of their overwhelming whiteness in a party that overall that has become much more diverse. Now, a few months ago, the Pew Center out in Washington came out with a very large and thorough survey of American Jewry. One of its findings was that more than 70% of American Jews support the Democratic Party. And so for the American Jewish community, these party dynamics that I've just described really present some very real challenges. First, what are challenges we talk about? First, among these strong liberal voices within the party, they don't just want to criticize Israel. They are leveraging their power to reshape American policy towards Israel. And indeed, given that Israel, love of Israel, support of Israel, having a connection to Israel is still a touchstone for the American Jewish community, these changes threaten so much of what we have taken for granted over the last 40 years. Now, I want to be very clear. Israelis argue passionately about the direction of their country. That's okay. American Jews argue passionately about the direction of Israel. That's also okay. But what we are talking about here is an increasingly louder group of fellow Americans, some of them in elected office, who are demanding not just diplomatic pressure, something we've always seen, stand up to them, fight them, challenge them from the State Department perspective. It's not just diplomatic pressure they're seeking, but economic pressure too. And that's new. We haven't had to deal with that in the last few decades. And this is why the current fights are just so different than we have become accustomed to since the 1980s. The changes within the Democratic Party have also made it much more comfortable for the anti-Semitism that is sometimes found in the far left to come out from the shadows. When the far left was considered out of fashion, we didn't have to worry about this as much. But now that it's becoming more mainstream again, it's a different story. And so for Democrats, the nightmare scenario, for Jewish Democrats, the nightmare scenario is that we will face what the Labour Party in England has faced in recent years: anti-Semitism among major party leaders with virtually no negative consequences from the party leadership. We are far from that point, but that left undealt with, that's a potential future. As in the United Kingdom, the anti-Semitism among some on the far left is often camouflaged in debates over Israel and whether it even has a right to exist. When the fundamental question is whether there should even be a modern Jewish homeland, We are way beyond just talking about policies in the territories, the West Bank. These dynamics came to a fore this past week. And as some of you might have heard, a small but vocal group of hard left Democrats in Congress, and one Republican actually, refused to support emergency fiscal authorization to keep the federal government going because the legislation also contained support for the Iron Dome defensive missile system in Israel. The Iron Dome is an anti-missile weapon system that saved countless innocent civilians when several thousand rockets were launched from Gaza against Israel's population centers just a few months ago. In the current situation, the Iron Dome is critical to Israel's survival. Now, with only a 5-seat majority in the House, and therefore no room to spare, Democratic congressional leaders took out the Iron Dome funding, let the authorization pass, and then within 48 hours, put the Iron Dome funding back up for a vote as a standalone bill. It passed 424 to 9 with 2 voting present. This wasn't just a policy debate on the floor of the House. Comments on the floor veered into questioning Israel's right to exist, with accusations that Israel was an apartheid state, a scurrilous comment that was immediately rebuked by both Democratic and Republican House members. We should get some perspective here. Getting 11 votes out of 435 doesn't demonstrate a whole lot of support for this extreme position. And while some of us might think that 11 is still too much, we shouldn't think that the end of the world is upon us either. But what is clear is that Jewish Democrats who are supporters of Israel, as much of the American Jewish community is as well, are facing challenges we haven't seen. We haven't had to deal with this at all, really, since the 1970s. Let me take a moment to turn to the Republicans. They have their own changes within their party that they're wrestling with corresponding challenges for American Jewry. Today's GOP is no longer aligned along the traditional ideological line, like what I talked about with the Democrats. You used to have Goldwater and Reagan conservative Republicans on one side, people who called themselves Rockefeller and Tom Kean Republicans on the other side. That construct has disappeared. Donald Trump changed all of that. He altered the paradigm, and the party has a new construct that defines who is inside the GOP tent. Today, the Republican Party's divisions are not ideological as much as they are cultural. The questions that drive the GOP's factions are about trust in societal institutions, whether you trust government, whether you trust the news, whether you trust business, and most importantly, whether you trust Donald Trump. We have been building towards this shift from ideological divisions, like most of us came to understand the Republican Party and who was in it, to more cultural ones. And we've been building towards this for a while. And this is why many observers argue that the Trump phenomenon, no one took him really seriously, even when he came down the escalator and announced his bid for the presidency. But the Trump phenomenon, which is real, was an outgrowth of even broader trends. And first and foremost, the trend that led to the emergence of Trump and Trumpism was the explosive growth and power of Fox News. Now, of course, Fox News is itself a product of the world that I just described before, one that has gotten faster, you need the news constantly, and a consumer base that demands more personalized choices. So not only did Fox offer a conservative lens on what was happening in the world, but several Fox opinion leaders felt very comfortable channeling and peddling in anger at society, at societal institutions, anger at liberals and at Democrats and others. This became the new conservatism, and it made Rupert Murdoch and Roger Ailes billions of dollars. It also reflected the very fears that our founding fathers had 2 centuries ago, that factionalism would lead each side to viewing each other as evil, even treasonous. But it was a way to make money, and it became a successful thing, and people liked it, which is why it made money. So can we really be surprised when a candidate like Trump, outspoken, brash, crass, magnetic, and intoxicating to millions of Americans, storms to the front of the pack of more traditional politicians and wins his party nomination? No, we shouldn't be surprised. You may recall, excuse me, Chris Christie, New Jersey's own Chris Christie, ventured into the 2016 presidential race, proclaiming that he would tell it like it is. And he was doing pretty well in New Hampshire and Iowa until Trump got into the race and also told it like it is, but more so. Christie never had a chance. Today, we live in a sort of post-Trump world. And by that, I mean the former president is still out there arguing that he is still the rightful president. He's not in the White House, but he doesn't mean he hasn't left the stage. In this world, there are 5 key factions within the Republican Party, the modern Republican Party. And Trump's former pollster, a guy named Tony Fabrizio, has done some of the best work on breaking this down. So of these 5 factions, first you have the diehard Trumpers. This is about 27% of the current GOP. These are the people who would still vote for Trump if he ran again today, no matter who was the opponent. They aren't conspiracy theorists, but they believe what Trump tells them. And perhaps what distinguishes them most, they are more devoted to Trump than to the Republican Party. That's one faction. A second faction among Republicans today are the Trump boosters. They make up the largest segment party, about 28, 29%. And they really like the former president. But only a slight majority of them, not all, just a slight majority of them would vote for him again in the primary. And for this group, they are Republicans first, Trump people second. 20% of the party is what we can call the post-Trump GOP. They have a strong, positive opinion of Donald Trump, but they're ready to move on. Okay, that was it. We're ready to move on. They don't want the Donald to run again. You have about 15%, 15% of the party who what we have now come to call the never Trumpers. This is the only group of Republicans who have a negative view of Trump. They think the Trump presidency was devastating for the GOP. And after the party lost the House, lost the Senate, lost the White House in 4 years, they have a case to make. And finally, we have what the pollster Fabrizio describes as InfoWars GOP. They're taking the name of the conspiracy theory dominated radio show, InfoWars. This faction of Republicans, it's 10% of the party, but this faction of Republicans still represents millions of Americans. They are defined by their favorable image and strong belief in QAnon, the disgraced but still popular conspiracy theory. And for these people, Donald Trump is the savior. So in sum, for the Republicans, Donald Trump was an iconoclast, completely reshaping the party's traditional divisions. About 51%, just over a majority of the party would vote for Trump again. And some 34% would like to move on. And the remaining 15% who just don't like Trump are a bit lonely and isolated right now in this version that we see of the current Republican Party. Now, for many of us in the American Jewish community, a silver lining of the Trump administration was its strong, absolute support of Israel. Lots of Jews were happy that the US embassy was moved to Jerusalem, finally. But a much larger majority of Jews believe that that support of Israel wasn't enough and that it was overshadowed by their view that Trump's leadership of the GOP unleashed much more nefarious forces here at home. The fact is, for millions of American Jews, the rise in anti-Semitism in this country and the election of Donald Trump were not coincidental. They're somehow related for these people. American Jews have thrived in America, the golden land or golden Medina, because we fought for and won victories over bigotry, including quotas and restrictive housing covenants and all these things that we overcame and has allowed our community to grow and thrive in this world. Our history has shown us that as Jews, the more pluralistic society, the more we thrive. And you go back for every great Jewish community in the world, from Spain, Israel, all of these different places. When there was pluralism, we thrived. Today, unfortunately, there are louder and louder voices who have chosen to make their home within the Republican Party and do not share these sentiments and values. They believe that the pluralistic, tolerant America, an America that is diverse, is an America that is weak and in disarray. And these angry voices, surely just a minority, but louder and louder, these angry voices led to Charlottesville in 2017. They led to the Tree of Life Synagogue massacre in 2018. They led to the shooting in Poway, California, Chabad House in 2019. This is not just me offering this analysis. It's a conclusion of these overt bigots that we see, that we know of. David Duke, Richard Spencer. They have come out of the darkness in recent years and told us publicly, we feel emboldened by Trump. Now, good Republicans, of which there are tens of millions, are now stuck with these kinds of people in their tent. And that is a real challenge for all American Jews. Again, I want to be clear. The Republican Party is not filled with racists and anti-Semites, and neither is the Democratic Party. But like the Democratic Party, today's Republican Party is being challenged because those who don't like Jews are finding it an easier time to get involved and be accepted increasingly in the party. These divisions within each party, ideologically among Democrats, culturally among Republicans, are real and palpable. And so internally, there are major fights going on within each party over their future. Good Democrats, good Republicans are fighting with those who would be dangerous for all of us. Now, some of you may well be involved with these battles, and I thank you. And if you're not, then now might be the time to start thinking about what more you can do. Over 90% of eligible American Jews are registered to vote. It's a tremendous number. But parties are dynamic in organizations, and therefore power emanates from those who get more involved. If these elements within each party who pose the most serious threat to American Jews are to be defeated, it will be because more of us found a way to do more to support the good guys. The challenge for American Jewry is to ignore the chaos I joked about at the beginning and to jump in. The answer is more involvement, not less. For the last 40 years, this hasn't been necessary. We haven't had to worry about extremists. They were hidden. Reagan's version of the Republican Party kept these people at bay. The Democratic Party, as it reformed itself to be a more centrist, moderate kind of party, they kept these people and these voices at bay. But everything has changed. And so now American Jewry needs to respond. Our engagement in politics, our willingness to speak up as Jews, as Americans, as patriots, that is what will make the difference. When I was a senior in high school, and I grew up in North Jersey, when I was a senior in high school, I was elected national president of my Zionist youth group, my Zionist youth movement, a thing called Young Judea, which at that time was sponsored by Hadassah. One of the songs we used to sing in our overnights and camps and conventions was a song called Lo Alecha. It took its words from the Talmudic text that reads, "You are not obligated to finish the work, but neither are you free from trying." So in considering the program this morning, I've been thinking a lot about this song, because whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, these are real challenges out there for all of us as Americans, as Jews, and as patriots. And while we might not solve the problems, we are obligated to try. So that's hopefully some food for thought. Thank you, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Terrific. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. I'm sure we're going to have quite a few questions, comments, and remarks. please use the raise hand feature in reactions, and hopefully I'll be able to see. Okay, Len Berman, if you want to unmute. There you go.
Okay. Here's my question. The squad, the 9 who voted against the Iron Dome, they don't live in New Jersey. I had supported strongly the one who ran against Ilhan Omar, and he almost beat her out, but not quite. What do you suggest that we do to get rid of, to support? Are there any organizations that go after these Jew haters that we can contact and be part of and write for, do something?
So, look, as I'm sure most people know, AIPAC is a start. The American Israel Public Affairs Committee is a start. Now, AIPAC doesn't endorse and rate candidates. So while they have PAC in their name, they're not a organization. But members of AIPAC get together, and they will go out and support opponents. So that is perhaps one place to start, to just say, who do I talk to if I want to make my difference, write a check against the people who are primarying these people or even running in a general election. Though these are very democratic districts that these folks represent. And so it's really a primary if you're going to get rid of it. Now, one of the interesting dynamics that is happening, and this was at least a theory presented with Ocasio-Cortez, who voted present and did this whole tearful thing about why she voted present. Her district may be redistricted. We are now about to go through, as we do every 10 years, redrawing of the lines, because they've counted everybody in the census, and now they've got to redo the lines because every congressional district in every state has to be equal to every other one. What this could mean for some of these folks who voted against the Iron Dome, or in the case of somebody like Ocasio-Cortez, is that she might suddenly get Riverdale, an overwhelmingly Jewish community in her district. She's going to have a harder time holding the positions that she holds today. My sense, complete conjecture theory here, is that she's worried about that because that process is beginning right now in New York, the redrawing of the congressional lines. She voted present, and her squad and other folks said, what are you doing? Either fight for what you believe in or don't. Where are you making this political calculation? Which is why she did this long, tearful apology for it. But the fact is, some of these folks may well be fighting for their next reelection in different district lines, and that could help those who are out there trying to put it all together. So AIPAC as an organization is a place to start, and something to just watch for is what these people's districts look like by 2022.
Is there any way, I'm a supporter of AIPAC, certainly. Is there any way of getting the names when this happens, the elections come around, is there any way of getting the names of the people who are running against these incumbents so we can directly support them?
Yes, but I couldn't give you the name of a particular site that a website that will list it. I'm sure it exists. I'm just not familiar with it right now. Okay. So I couldn't direct you there. But look, the world is online. You can find out about any district and who's running anywhere there. But again, AIPAC is the start. There are regional captains, lay leaders, as well as professionals working there, and they can say, look, we won't do this, but here's somebody you can talk to, and that's how you can learn more, figure out if there's other ways you want to be involved.
Thank you very much.
Nelson, are you unmuted? Nelson, did we lose you? Ed Silver, unmute yourself.
Doctor, thanks for being with us this morning. Appreciate your commentary. Within the Republican tent, you did not mention the orthodoxy of the evangelicals who see the world in absolute terms. So the impact on Judaism is one thing, but I'm wondering your comments regarding the evangelical right.
The evangelical right is a core constituency within the Republican Party. It, much like practicing Jews, it can even range there, and much like in modern Orthodoxy, it can range from Borough Park to Teaneck, and you can have a whole different spectrum among those who would call themselves Orthodox, and so too with evangelicals. But that community forms a particular base within the Republican Party, a critical element of its coalition. It affects, and they are among Israel's strongest defenders. They might be doing because they think it will bring forth the rapture and other kind of other kinds of views of what will happen in the future with their view of the second coming of Jesus. But from a strictly political perspective, they're part of the base. They are strong supporters of Israel, and it helps because the fact is the American Jewish community is overwhelmingly in 50 to 75 metropolitan areas. It's not everywhere. And so from a strictly Israel perspective, that helps there. Where it doesn't help is the fact that an overwhelming majority of American Jews also find themselves left of center and would describe themselves as progressive, as liberal, not as conservatives. It's about a 2-to-1 between those who consult them among the American Jews who call themselves more progressive as opposed to more conservative. And there are a whole host of social issues that affect American Jewry, that American Jewry has opinions about, overwhelming majorities of American Jews have opinions about. And in those issues, there are real disagreements there. So it's part of it. They are allies in certain issues, I think, for the American Jewish community. They're on the opposite side of a majority of American Jews on other issues. And so you have to, these battles just have to be dealt with in isolation. And again, because it's because both parties, we don't have 50 parties. We have 2. And so everybody has a pretty broad tent. And therefore, you have a whole range of folks who get in under it. I'm not sure if that addressed specifically what you're looking for, but I let me know if you'd like me to clarify something.
You're good.
Thank you, sir.
Nelson, are you still with us? I see your name. I know you had your hand up. Well, Nelson, if your audio is working, free to jump back in. Anybody else? Any other questions, comments,
I have a question.
concerns? Lee,
Good morning. Sorry I hopped in late, and I don't know if you addressed it. My own experiences are that more and more Jewish families that I encounter seem to be of the ilk of the Noam Chomsky school of approach to Israel, or maybe Notori Karta. It's about the same thing. So I guess I want the input, the insight of a professional in what's really happening in that regard to our population And why any politician from either Dem or Republican Party might want to pay any attention to our shrinking population.
So, first of all, American Jewry actually isn't shrinking. We've grown a little bit here since the last survey was done. Obviously, the census doesn't ask this, but again, I'm referring to the Pew study, which you can all Google. And I mean, it's, a huge 100-page document, but it's really interesting. So we're growing a little, but there are changes within the community. 15%, 15% of American Jews under the age of 30 are not white. You have, adopted people who have converted, people who are the children of those who have converted. And so we are becoming, at least generationally, a little more diverse. And you are correct in that there are some more, an increasing, it's become more fashionable to be Jews who enjoy criticizing Israel. I won't say enjoy, that's the wrong word, excuse me. I didn't mean to put such a loaded term on it. Who feel obligated and accepted to be part of BDS, of boycott, diversity, divestment and sanctions, who think there's no difference between Israel and South Africa under apartheid. Now, this is wrong, and there are folks who are out there fighting them. But are there voices out there reflecting this larger sort of societal changes we've seen? Yes. What I can tell you, get to the first part of your question, is that the statistics don't seem to show that it's become anything close to a majority, or even growing too significantly. Among younger people, among younger Jews, it's much more of an issue. But the Jewish community in America is 7 million people. And so there are louder voices. They're on Twitter. They're on Instagram. They make more noise, and there are a few more of them. But it's not something that has become sort of overwhelming yet. So that's I understand when you prefaced your comment by saying the people you're meeting. I can just tell you statistically, it hasn't quite gotten to sort of that status, but it's out there, and I think that poses challenges for everybody who's involved with Jewish education. I think it poses challenges for everybody who's involved with Jewish continuity, which is a fancy way of saying, will Jews marry other Jews and raise Jews? That's what we're talking about when we say continuity, just the fancy word the organizations use. So, these are all concerns. And that's why you have to appreciate something like the Pew study, because it gave us a bit of a understanding of what we're dealing with. The more people who go visit Israel, the better. The more people who are, it gets back to all the things that perhaps many of us understood, which is why you belong to a Jewish men's club. And there are others, perhaps friends of yours, who are Jewish men of your peers who don't. Not just because they're busy, but because they don't care about it. These are challenges for any community, and there will be challenges for us as well. My point today was really just talking about how those challenges manifest themselves broadly in each party, and what's going to be needed. We're just out of fighting shape. You haven't had to fight this stuff, since you were dealing with people who were talking about national liberation movements, and that was hip, between 1972. But by 1982, we were in a different world. I mean, that's the Reagan era. It was different than 10 years before. And for the next 35 years, we had a different kind of understanding of how Jewish power and Jewish politics all came to play. Era's end. and we're in a new world. And I think the quicker we, as American Jews, can sort of accept that, the more realistic we can be about the challenges that are facing us, regardless of which party you belong to.
Actually, your presentation was excellent, but at the same time, it gives me a prescription that is so complicated that it's random, in the sense that it's almost impossible to predict the future because of the complexity. I mean, what is your prediction of the future when we're dealing with such a complex, random kind of situation?
Just trying to think of how to begin. At my current university, at Rowan University, at Rutgers University, where I did my graduate work, there is a Department of Political Science. Princeton, decidedly, where I went as an undergrad, called it the Department of Politics. Why? Because they said it's not science. It is not. You might use scientific methods to count things, but the fact is, science means there are certain rules. 2 + 2 is 4. Anywhere in the world, it is what it is. But candidate A defeats candidate B, not always. You know, and there's so many different factors, like you just pointed out, that it sometimes seems random. It's not quite random. There are trends. There are likelihoods. And so what we know from experience and from scholarship is that the voices that are heard are the ones who get involved. And if you're going to get into this fight, if it's important enough to you, then you got to get into the fight, because that makes a difference on the outcomes. Plato, just to use somebody who wrote even before Pirkei Avot, before the Lo Alecha quote I gave at the end of my remarks. Plato, and I'm paraphrasing a little bit, he goes, those who always think they're too smart for politics end up getting ruled inevitably by people who are much dumber. And I think that is the point. This is messy stuff. This is chaotic stuff. This is random stuff. You win, you lose. It's not always clear. You can give lots of money to somebody who's running against Congresswoman Ilhan Omar in Minnesota, and she still wins. That's frustrating to anybody. Doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. Doesn't mean you shouldn't try and hold her accountable. Doesn't mean your voice shouldn't be involved. And so this is the long game that we're dealing with. And because we haven't had to fight this way, you haven't had these kinds of battles within each party, and you haven't had to deal with this set of circumstances in so long, my sense is that we're all a little comfortable. We're all a little heavier than we want to be, around the middle, politically speaking. And so unless we want to let ourselves be run by people, we have to say, no, I'm going to get involved. And when there's a plank on the party platform about X, I'm going to stand up and fight for that. And when there is a primary, I'm going to get involved with that. And if there are other ways that you find, I'm going to write a letter when someone makes that, and I'm going to stand up and speak when someone, attacks it, and say, as a Democrat, as a Republican, whatever it'll be, you're going to stand up and talk. And speak and find a way to get involved, because that's the only way change will come. If nothing, that is the one constant. We know that if we're all quiet, somebody else is going to speak for you. And that's the basic rule of politics.
I mean, I'm still optimistic. I mean, it just seems to me that after all the crises that we have lived through, it's fixed. And I think my approach is much more optimistic. Regardless of anything, the United States is such a complex, kind of large thing that it just gets better.
And I'm sorry, my apologies to the group if I came across as too depressing. I was trying to be more of the realist here than really cynical, or things can change. That is, I do believe things can change, but we have to understand our environment that we're dealing with in order to understand 2021 is not even, it's not 1991. It was a different political world. Not even 2001. It's a different political world for all of us. And I think we can do it. I think we did it. I mean, we have seen, anti-Israel members of Congress go down in defeat because hundreds, if not thousands, of Jewish college students went to a district and voted that person out. There are these stories, these happen, but that's what it takes. I mean, I grew up, and I am perhaps slightly a bit younger than the other members of this call, but I grew up. My high school years were spent going to Soviet Jewry rallies down at in Lower Manhattan. I was going there. We were let my people go. I was grew up fighting to save Ethiopian Jewry and to advocate for Operation Solomon and Operation Moses that brought this entire community, which if you've seen Israel in the last 30 years, looks different than what it did before. There's diversity in a completely different way. But and then the Soviet Union fell, and then the Ethiopians were saved. And so, who is your average 25-year-old or 30-year-old? What was their high school experience like? Where were they challenging to stand up for the Jewish community? They haven't had to. And if you're going to be involved in politics, now's the time to start thinking of it, because we know change can come. We know we saved Soviet Jewry. We got Jews out. We got Sharansky out because we advocated and pursued and wrote letters and did protests and did those kinds of things. So we know change can happen, and I am optimistic that it can. This is just a different forum. And as long as we're realistic about what's happening, the way there were folks who said, "Oh, we shouldn't worry about Ethiopia," then I'm not only, and people who said, "Well, don't shush." Still, that crowd that said we need to work with the Soviets, we don't want to antagonize them. And there were others like Scoop Jackson, generations ago, a senator from the state of Washington, who said, "No, we should have an embargo on grain sales until they open up their doors to these refuseniks." That confrontation it's a debate within the Jewish community, and it's debate that I think we need now to be realistic about what is happening, the challenges. Small. These are not things. The Democratic Party is not anti-Semitic. The Republican Party is not racist. But folks who have found it a little bit easier now than they did 10 years ago to be under those tents. And that poses a threat to things. Small, but we have to be realistic about it. So I'm having grown up in a world in which societal change has come and advocacy on behalf of the Jewish community can make a difference. I am absolutely, like you, perhaps like you, very confident that things can change, but we can't sit back.
Doctor, if you have time, we have a couple more hands raised.
Sure, not a problem.
Bob, you're up next.
Thank you. First of all, Dr. Dworkin, an extremely interesting presentation. Two questions. First of all, what do you feel is the possibility of the rise of a third party? And secondly, I went to college during the Vietnam era, and what we saw during the Vietnam era was the increased influence of media. Do you believe that media, with all of its diverse contributions, is helping or creating a negative landscape for politics in this country?
Okay, there's a lot there. Let me talk about the media influence first. That part of your question. Does it help or is it negative? I mean, I have to punt and say it's both. So, there are, because media has been decentralized, as we all see, right? There's no more three networks and three people a thing. There's no more established pillars. I mean, the Washington Post and the New York Times are still the dominant papers of record. They are, but not everybody reads them. And therefore you have anybody with a cell phone becomes a media mogul. Blogs and this notion of social influencers and people who can do it. So the media is so broad, which was on one hand a wonderful thing. Look at all these voices. Again, as I talked about, sort of like we love choices. Who doesn't want to be able to choose from all these things? On the other hand, there are voices who are negative, and people make money by talking, by pitting one side against the other. They make money by being controversial. They get followers and clicks because they have headlines. So there is a negative side to it and a positive side to it there. In terms of the media influence, it's just become so democratized. So many people can become media. What is InfoWars? It's a website. It's a television show. Newsmax is a website. These things don't have to worry about printing papers. And they have advertising on their own because you're able to target and bring people together. Your question about the potential of a third party is a good one, and there are several reasons why it's probably not going to happen. And that's just despite lots of people saying they'd love to sort of have that at least a third option. Notably, it is a tremendous undertaking to put it together. I mean, Ross Perot started one a little bit, but it was dominated by him. And he was out there, and by the time he was gone, it was gone. There. You have in different states, the Working Families Party. I mean, New York makes it a little bit easier. They'll be out there to do it, but they're not across the nation. They're not on the ballot everywhere. I mean, these two parties, so the rules have been set up to favor two parties. And until those rules change, that's what we're going to have. In addition, it's so expensive to make the change because the Republican Party and the Democratic Party have, in effect, spent billions of dollars over the course of American history branding themselves in a way that a new upstart, a third party, would have a very difficult time. We also have, and just one other, when I talk about the rules, just a last point about that, we have a winner-take-all system. You win by one vote, you're the person. That's it. There's no proportional system like you see in England, like you see in Israel. And because of that, again, that's what I mean by the rules are structured to have these two. So I think we're sort of stuck with them for the time being.
Thank you.
Excellent. Scott?
You addressed the Republican Party and the Democratic Party. However, there's a growing number of people who are independent or categorize themselves as independent. And I think that is the influence that's determining a lot of the elections now, is this middle ground of people who don't really agree with either party or part of one and part of the other. Economically, maybe one, socially, maybe the other.
You're absolutely right. It is a chunk. What actually the data, the survey data has shown, it's actually growing increasingly smaller. Those who define themselves, the fact is, people who say I'm socially moderate but fiscally conservative. That's a common thing. We see plenty of people in New Jersey talking, identifying themselves that way. but 85, 90% of the time they're voting for one party. So they describe themselves, they think of themselves as independent, but overwhelmingly they're there. I don't want somebody who's too liberal. Oh, I don't want somebody who's too conservative, but generally they're voting Republican or they're voting Democrat. That's what we've come to see. The state and the country as a whole has become more partisan. And we can go back to Gingrich in '94, a guy named Steve Kornacki, who was a reporter on MSNBC, but wrote a really good book called The Red and the Blue, which sort of traces this history, if anyone want to pick it up. But let me just give a statistic from New Jersey. When I say we become more partisan, 15 years ago, Democrats have always outnumbered registered Republicans in New Jersey. And traditionally, the unaffiliated, people who were registered voters in New Jersey, but not a registered Democrat, not a registered Republican, were the largest group there. So 15 years ago, Democrats registered in New Jersey outnumbered registered Republicans by about 290,000. That was the margin between there. And overwhelming, like you had another 800,000 that were the unaffiliated. Maybe they voted Republican, maybe they voted Democrat, but they just weren't registered members of the party. Today, that 290,000, 15 years, that margin is now over 1 million. There are over 1 million more registered Democrats than registered Republicans in New Jersey today. So for a Republican, if you're Jack Ciattarelli running for governor, if you're any of these, any Republican running statewide, it's a much steeper hill that you have to call. The incline is just much tougher. And today, the number of registered Democrats outnumbers is about 100,000 more than the number of unaffiliated voters. We have become more partisan. People have decided that I want a D or an R next to my name. And this, I think, again, poses its own set of challenges. There will always be, as you described, in an election, you're trying to find the people who are persuadable, who could go, one way or the other. But overall, the data seems to show we've become a much more hyper-partisan. We talk about it. We watch different news programs. You see study after study that says Democrats who watch MSNBC, Republicans who watch Fox have very different understanding about what happened in the world that day. So all of this is coming to play, and that number of truly independent people is actually shrinking. So it's its own set of challenges. We go through these periods. It doesn't last forever, but that's where we are, and it will be critical for those, as we move forward. I think it's critical to both American politics and to the issues I tried to raise today, to get those people who are truly independent thinking about some of these things and understanding why these marginal but louder voices pose real challenges.
Ed, you've got your hand up?
Yes, I do. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. One of the organizations that I was most impressed with in the last election was Lincoln Project, because I think that they did an incredible job of having hard-hitting, effective advertising. And yet I don't know that they had much of an impact. Can you tell me a little bit about what the impact of organizations such as that are essentially single issue parties, or advertisers, but number one, do you think that they had much of an impact? And number two is, do you think that this type of hard-hitting advertisements are effective in general?
I'm not sure they had the Lincoln Project, which was in support the Never Trumper wing of the Republican Party by attacking Trump and by attacking Republicans who were Republican office holders who were supportive and acquiescing to Trump. I'm not sure that they had much of an impact. I mean, the fact is the number of never Trumpers in the Republican Party stays around 15%. They didn't convince a lot of people. What it was exciting for Democrats who wanted to see really hard-hitting ads, for Republicans who didn't like Trump and wanted to see some hard-hitting ads. I'm just not sure who. We haven't seen any real conclusive data that they convinced anybody. And the unfortunate thing with the Lincoln Project was the postscript, where it basically deteriorated into a bit of name calling and power plays among these very talented, very creative Republican media folks who were making 10% on every ad placed. And it became, and unfortunately, because I think there is a role, for that within the Republican Party. But its overall impact, I think, is debatable. And as an organization, it has fallen. I mean, which is why you don't hear from them now. There.
And there was a radical reconstruction of the Republican Party in the last election. Is it possible, or is there any likelihood, in your opinion, that it can reform itself under an, I would love to see a return to no labels or, a similar type of organization, but it's not going to happen. But can the Republicans at some point become reorganized as a rational party?
Yes, of course, because there are rational Republicans out there. But is it going to happen in the next year? No. Why did, I know this is a thing, but parties reconstitute themselves after big election losses. That's what happens. And the Labour Party in England was devastated. And Jeremy Corbyn was thrown out. Because which was good riddance, yes, thing, because he was an anti-Semite, because he had no problem with other anti-Semites being part of the party, and this was a challenge for all of my Jewish friends who are living in Birmingham, England, and in London, and Golders Green, and all of these neighborhoods. If you know folks who live over in the United Kingdom, they were tremendous challenges there, but they had to lose big in order to do it. The Republican Party after 2012 did a postmortem. They commissioned a giant report like, why did we lose? We thought we could beat Obama in the second term. We thought this was done. We had issues. What did we lose? And they concluded this report that said, look, the country's becoming more diverse. We are increasingly old and white. Our average age New Jerseyan Republican Party member is 50 and above. And it's much lower for the Democratic Party. I can't tell you exactly what it is, though. So they had this report. They said, look, we have to do more outreach to the growing Hispanic community, the growing the African-American community. Younger people, we've got to reach out. Donald Trump threw that all on its head because he won by elevating the turnout among white Americans. And there were lots of reasons that the Democrats and the Clinton campaign of 2016 allowed that to happen and were not effective in their own messaging. So my point is that yes, but Democrats had to figure out what to do, and that's what'll happen. I think if the Republican Party is going to reform itself, it's going to have to lose. They have to lose in a big way, in a way that doesn't. Where everybody isn't challenging the legality and authenticity of the loss, which is a challenge in and of itself these days. So once you lose, then you go back. I mean, it's an old thing. Maybe your mom's told you too. My mom taught me, look, you never learn anything from winning. You win. She said that it was a great line. I had just come back. I lost some school election for like the student council vice president. I was 15. Thought my political career was over. She says, son, you don't learn anything from winning. You only learn from losing. That is the only way you get to see, because if you win, you thought you did it all right. I must be brilliant. Yay. But when you lose, that's when there's a challenge. So is there an opportunity for the Republican Party to change? Absolutely. It won't happen soon. It could happen, meaning it's not going to happen this year. But I think it's going to require a big loss of some kind. And I'm not sure we're there yet in order to sort of force that kind of reckoning.
Mike, you're up.
Yes, that was, this whole thing has been incredibly impressive. I never thought you'd be able to get through this without some people having steam coming out of their ears, but well done.
There are a couple more questions, I'm sure. We'll see, but
yes,
thank you. I appreciate that.
On a generally a wider view question, it's probably about a third of the people here, plus folks I've spoken to, Jews I've spoken to across the country, have all agreed that it seems as if that slowly, almost imperceptibly, the walls are closing in on Jews in the United States. Where it's right or wrong, that's what people are feeling. It seems as if there's a movement over the last handful of years or months that anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism is almost becoming somehow politically correct. What can we do about it? And is it just by coincidence that I've heard this from so many people, or so it's really not happening, or what? Could you comment, please?
Sure. So look, the studies show, the crime statistics show that anti-Semitism attacks and issues and incidents, anti-Semitic incidents have risen. It's clearly, it's as high as it's almost ever been. So the Anti-Defamation League, the ADL, is out there reporting. The FBI reports that. So it's not something new. That is, you're not just thinking it. The statistics make that or putting that out there. The anti-Zionism challenge is out there. Anybody who's watched the kind of debate over at Rutgers University and the boycott, divestment, and sanction movement on campus, the challenges that we've seen for Jewish students, pro-Israel Jewish students on campus are real. They need to be supported, and they have stepped up. I mean, what's wonderful when you watch, sort of the Rutgers Jewish community is that they have stood up and they've called it out and they have been there. But they're in a fight on some of these campuses. Not everywhere, not every campus in the country, but there are places where, yes, this is an issue. So you're not imagining it. We've seen it, and others have seen it there. But to the question of, so what do we do about it? That's I don't know whether there's anything it's when you say it's become more fashionable. Yes, and so you still have to call out for the reasons that it was wrong. 1971, pre-Munich, you have people wearing keffiyehs and saying, the Zionists have done this and that, whatever it was. The American Jewish community was still in the euphoria of the Six-Day War, the little, country that defended itself. And these are moments, and many of you on this call may well remember that sort of time and place. But it's different now. And it's different, and it means we have to engage differently in order to combat this. I didn't need to join the ADL fighting anti-Semitism 10 years ago. I didn't feel threatened by it. I wasn't concerned with it. It wasn't a big deal. And in the last 5 years, I have. That's my personal thing, and each of us would make their own decision. So it is, I don't think you're just imagining it. At the same time, and I just want to be clear, there's not an anti-Semite behind every rock. Okay, we should understand the squad is 4 people who make a lot of noise. there were 9 people who voted against, 11 if you count the present people who voted present. 11 people out of 435. I'm not worried about them. At moments, they have, more influence than people would like. So it's not the end. We are not, Germany in 1928, or 1938 for that matter. But we have to be real about what it is, and what is out there. Because left ignored, 10 years from now, we look back and say, we should have been more aggressive in the beginning. That's what I believe we'll do. And that was what I was trying to urge everyone on this call to at least consider from their own perspective.
Thank you.
You're muted, Phil.
Phil, unmute yourself.
Sorry about that. 2 questions. Jerry, then Nelson, and then we've got to call it for time. Jerry, you're up.
Thank you so much. This presentation has been so eye-opening. I really do appreciate it. Thank you for spending the time with us.
Thank you, sir.
I want to talk about the media. And it seems to me that the popular media is now more biased than I've ever seen in my life, to the point that you can't even have a discussion with a friend or neighbor, because if they're watching CNN or MSNBC, their perception of the world is so totally different than the other neighbor who's watching Fox or Newsmax. It seems the media has taken sides and reports on those facts and interprets those facts after they've decided what side of the fence they're on. And I'm so not accustomed to that type of news reporting that it shocks me, and it makes it very difficult to even have a conversation because you can't even agree on the facts. What think you?
It is significant here. Look, and it's not the first time we've had this. Partisan media back in Jacksonian democracy, back in the early 1800s, you would get the papers, the Union leader, our boys take Albany, that was the headline. They were effectively a partisan press. They were a trumpet for their party. And then with the progressive era, just historically, you came to understand what public interest reporting was going to be about. That we serve the public, we try to inform, and all those rules that we might have learned, each of us, in some civics class or a journalism class, or came to understand and expect from our newspapers. We understood what there was an editorial page, but the news was the news. Again, as I alluded to in my opening remarks, you can make money. I mean, what Fox News figured out, what Roger Ailes figured out, was that you can make a lot of money by being the loudest voice representing those folks. And that became, tremendous amount of money. And so then MSNBC said, you know what, we can do that too. And you had CNN, which has its own sort of bit of changes. But yes, it is tough to talk about politics with someone who watches Fox. What I would encourage, though, is to understand that your neighbor who watches Fox, if you watch MSNBC or vice versa, for that matter, is not your enemy. They're still your neighbor. So you can't necessarily, you have to, because once we stop talking to you got to talk to each other about your kids. You have to talk about the dog. You have to talk about whether the garbage got picked up and whether it's going to rain, and find something to connect with just as humans. If we're not talking about the election, I think there is a danger if our micro-targeted media effectively creates us as pockets who never engage each other on anything. And that is, that's a challenge. I've got students who are like, I don't want to talk to that person. They're a traitor. I don't want to talk to that person. I think they hate my kind of people. So find a way to talk to them about your homework. Do something else.
Is there a danger to America and to Israel by having such diverse sides selected in the media? The New York Times used to be a liberal newspaper, used to be a conservative newspaper. Now it's an extremely liberal newspaper, selecting the news that it fits to print. Is there a danger to America and to Israel as a result of that?
Look, there's always a danger to American politics and to American society, given the influence of any major actor, whether it's somebody who, whether it's Rupert Murdoch or the Sulzberger family or anybody who decides what we learn. So in that sense, we should all be thrilled that there is a democratization of news and that we can read any number of different things. I mean, American Jews can see English versions of the Israeli press, which is all over the map, in terms of its views about what's happening in Israel. But you can hit a link and read everything from Haaretz to Maariv, the Jerusalem Post, whatever it is you want to see. So that, is a positive thing. But there are voices who, democratization means you allow more people in, and that means you don't get to, you can't always pick and choose and be the gatekeeper for these voices who are dangerous to Israel, for these voices who are dangerous to American society. Look, power is always a scary thing in a representative democracy like ours. And that's why, the founding fathers did things that they could to try and keep it, because we didn't trust the masses, and at the same time limit it, which the whole checks and balances, brilliant concept. Again, something else that we had never seen in world history. So yes, there is a danger, but the only way dangers to democracy get resolved, the Chinese will tell you it's because the way you resolve those problems is by being more authoritarian. We're not going to do that, right? But so the way we have to do it is by being more involved, writing letters, by speaking to people, by choosing which news media you go to, in order to try and say or challenging people's decisions, or at least reading multiple and viewing multiple media, so that you can then say, okay, I didn't just listen to one source, I listened to multiple ones.
Thank you.
And Lee, you get to wrap it up.
Okay, thank you so much for your presentation. So in my youth, there was a newsletter, I think it was the I.L. Stone newsletter, and it was pretty targeted on keeping the public and elected officials and their employees, their staffs, apprised of the interests of the Jewish community with respect to Israel and the strengths that we could bring to the wheels and cogs of this whole country. There's so many organizations out there that are shotgun, untargeted. You donate the money and you find out, instead of going to influence elected officials, it may be going to a food pantry or the employees of a food pantry that are most favored that month. Where do you find a list of targeted Jewish interest organizations that are worthy of investigating? Because that landscape has really changed a lot in the last 2 decades.
Sure. So look, there are any number of, it's what we call what is called there's the Council of Presidents of Major American Jewish Organizations. It becomes the umbrella group to bring all of the dominant groups, organizational groups in Jewish groups in America to be able to talk to the president, to be able to talk to Congress, to be able to do what they can. They disagree on everything, from the far left to the far right, but that's a list, the people who are there. Of course, the joke is that they call it the Council of Presidents of Major American Jewish Organizations, as if there's a minor American Jewish organization. They all think they're major. But look, you have everything from the ZOA to the American Jewish Congress, the American Jewish Committee, all of these, to the ADL, all of these groups are out there. They all have specific agendas. They'll tell you what they do with their money. So if you want to be more focused on certain areas, then that would be the list to go through and to investigate. If you're looking, where can I get involved? Some of them have, Philadelphia, South Jersey chapters. They don't necessarily have meetings. They might have programs. They might have a speaker. Others might not. And then it's an opportunity for somebody to say, you know what? I want to represent that. I want to put together a program in my living room or to bring people together. That's where you would do it. They all have newsletters and websites that give you a sort of update on the news from their perspective and what's happening and what needs to be done and what are the challenges facing the Jewish community. Anyway, that's where I would start. The Council of Presidents of Major American Jewish Organizations. Literally, if you Google that, you'll see the list, and you can then investigate each of those and find which one might be the best fit your interests and desire to be involved.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dworkin. This was a great presentation. I'm glad it got everybody thinking. Yeah, we've got applause in the background.
Thank you.
So much.
Thank you, gentlemen.
We would be honored to offer you a 1-year membership to the men's club. We're still meeting virtually. Eventually, we will be back in the JCC, fingers crossed. But, please feel free. We'll send you the information if you'd like. Be amongst our members.
I greatly appreciate that. Let me just say thank you again to David Schwartz and to Phil. Philip, he never tells me which one he wants. But I want to thank all of you for the invitation. I want to thank all of you for spending the last hour and a half, talking about this stuff and hearing me out. And I am glad if it was met and makes you think about it, and that would be wonderful. Thank you for the honorary membership. Do I get one of the cool shirts, Ben? That's really the key. I mean, aside from your company, that's pretty cool.
You become a member, you get a cool shirt.
I'll get a cool shirt. All right. Well, there you go. Thank you. I greatly appreciate this opportunity to chat with you today.
Thank you.
Yeah. And feel free. We're just going to do a few minutes of business.
Okay. So I'll say goodbye. Thanks. Shalom, everybody. Have a good rest of the Chag, and I look forward to meeting all of you at some time again.
Shalom.
Bye now.
I would love that. Thank you. David, thank you so much. You find the most amazing speakers.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Yeah.
My pleasure.
Well, you just have to live for another 120 years to keep this going.
You get some more speakers about menorahs. Sometimes I can't sleep well and I want to be able to watch that.
Menorahs?
We have no idea.
Norm Rosen did that one. I'll try. I thought it was good.
I guess that was before my time. I'll very quickly mention our 2 volunteer opportunities. Again, while we have some more people on the line, Monday at the food bank, unloading the delivery of food should be about an hour, Monday 9:30, and Thursday the 30th, 9 o'clock in front of the JCC, taking down the sukkah. Hopefully that'll only be an hour or two as well. And as many hands as we could get on deck for that, that would be appreciated.
Where's the Monday location now? The food
At
bank?
at the food bank?
The old one or the new one?
There is no old one. There is no old one.
Okay,
Closed.
It's only Kings Highway.
okay, thanks.
Kings Highway and Mississippi and Miami Avenue.
Phil, I'm still.
Next to Lazard Dentistry.
Phil, I'm still unclear what we have to do about on Monday. I mean, 1 hour, there's massive amount of food, so I'm not understanding what we're doing.
Unloading trucks.
Unloading the truck.
Unloading trucks. Where are we gonna put all this stuff? I mean, we used to do it.
You put it in the trailer, or you put it in the garage.
Yeah, but I mean, the point is that we eventually have to sort it. I mean, that's what we did in the gym. We had 100 people sorting.
They have their own method of sorting now. You bring the stuff into the garage, you separate it by date and kosher, and they have people putting it on the shelves. They seem to have streamlined it. And it's working fine. We did it the other day.
Phil, what was that date again for taking down the sukkah at the time?
Thursday the 30th.
Okay.
9 o'clock, right in front of the entrance to the JCC.
I just sent out the flyer again.
Thank you.
I'd like to point out, we've done that for 25 years. This is the 25th year we've done it, starting at the old site on Route 70.
And it takes a long time to do it. Thursday, I'm doing Thursday food bank, right?
Yeah, well.
And Ed will be back. Ed will be back by Thursday. So we have the same team. Okay.
Yep.
The B team.
No, that was the A team.
So Rita also promised on Thursday that there would be some help from the JCC, the maintenance guys. So Thursday, 9 o'clock, JCC. Don, do we have anything for fantasy football to report? Do we still have Don? We do.
Yeah. Yes, unmute, Don. We're moving into our third week. By the grace of fantasy football gods, I'm in first place, only because of who I played, and they had a worse week than I did. But it's very competitive and a lot of injuries, But I know everybody's enjoying it.
Some of them are even football players.
Yeah, it's unbelievable how many people are hurt.
I hurt my thumb.
And Phil, can I mention regarding the baseball caps that we're looking at to try to acquire that would match our shirts? I'm looking for a couple of people that would help serve on the selection committee for what the final hat will be. If you're interested, if you let me know now or email me, I would appreciate it.
Yarmulke with a brim. A yarmulke with a brim.
Yeah.
Well, everybody's got an opinion, and Don actually asked to hear yours. So, please reach out to Don if you'd like to help him pick out a hat.
Sweet Jesus Medical
Investment Club. There's an investment club meeting coming up right after we're done. Are there any other announcements good and welfare, anything that people would like to add?
I have
one.
Len, then Ed.
Okay, I just had a joke I wanted to share. It's the holidays. Moses is standing at the bottom of Mount Sinai. There's a beam of lights coming down, and he looks up and he says, "You're on mute. You have to unmute yourself." There's another one where he's standing holding the Ten Commandments, and he says, "Yeah, what about funding?" Just a quick question. Philip, did you get my the minutes from the last meeting?
Yes, thank you so much. Yes. And did I
Ed has
hear,
to unmute. There he goes.
Ed, did you have something? If not, I wanted to,
He has to unmute himself.
while he's unmuting
Can
himself.
am I able to talk now?
There you are. I can, yep, we can hear you.
All right, just a
Stop
comment.
rushing me, okay? We'll be there at 1 o'clock, okay?
Hey, put yourself on mute.
Just a comment. In the third page of The Voice, Nelson is featured.
Yes.
So unfortunately, he made no mention of the South Jersey Men's Club, but other than that, it's a great piece.
He's the commander.
I'm sure he mentioned it and we were cut for editorial reasons.
And no, I did
Please.
mention it, but I didn't write the article. I haven't even really read the full thing. Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
But thanks.
Yeah.
I apologize.
That was going to be next. I've got it right here. I was going to share that.
Scott,
Congratulations.
why don't you mention the thing that you sent in a chat about?
What is that?
Scott Anderson had sent out a chat to remind people about the March of Remembrance.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, I haven't pulled that up yet. Okay.
Not sure when it is. Scott, when is the
For
March
that?
of Remembrance?
Monday, the 3rd.
Yeah, October 3rd.
On Sunday, October 3rd.
Do we have to sign up for it or anything, or just show
Yeah,
up?
the JCRC was doing signups online.
Thank you.
You could also sign up there, but it's easier online.
Very good. Anybody else? Hearing nothing? No? Okay. That was an excellent meeting. I'm very, very proud of the way that we handled ourselves. And there was no virtual bloodshed. So
I never had a doubt.
Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you, gentlemen, all for really representing our group so well. If there's nothing else, everybody have a wonderful.
Hey, Phil, just one
yes.
quickie for you, Phil. You were the
Please.
guy that was concerned the most about what was
Oh.
going to happen today. So
Oh, absolutely.
I think you're pleasantly surprised.
Yeah, I'm enormously. So yeah, no, I think that's fabulous. Everybody have a wonderful day. Happy belated New Year and be healthy. If I can, I will see you possibly at the sukkah, at the takedown. And if not, enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Hasta lumbago.
You too.